Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, that's good. Thank you to the UMC for the invitation to speak this morning. My name is Michael Deats. Most people know me as Mick, and I've worked for the WHO for the last 20 months. But prior to that, I was the head of enforcement with the British medicines regulator, the MHRA. And there I was responsible for compliance and investigation and prosecution and devising anti-counterfeit strategies for the United Kingdom. But this morning I'm going to talk to you about a surveillance and monitoring project that tackles SSFFC. Has anybody heard of that phraseology? Yes? Okay, this is a descriptive, complicated terminology that's being used at the moment until a universally agreed definition is arrived at for what we all used to call counterfeit medicine. Okay, so over the next hour, we'll just have a look at a few examples of SSFFC. This is substandard and spurious or falsely labelled or falsified or counterfeit medicines, depending on which part of the world you're from. It's called something different. And we'll talk about the surveillance and monitoring project, and we'll just have a look at a few of the pilot study findings. But while I'm speaking to you, I want you to think about your own role as pharmacovigilance experts in how you can assist in this surveillance and monitoring project. Has anybody here had any contact with counterfeit medicine? You have, sir? You are from? Baghdad. Okay. Anybody else? Yes. Okay. So we've got a handful of people that have had some contact. So all of the cases that I'm going to mention in this first section are all a matter of public record already, and we'll just run through those cases. How many pharmacists do we have represented here? So many pharmacists and nurses. Excellent. Okay. Well, at least we've got. Was it just one? And doctors, medical doctors. Okay, brilliant. You know, this is a fantastic audience, and it's a great opportunity to come along and speak to such a wide and varied, internationally, but also skills-wise group, which I hope is going to be relevant to this presentation. Okay, so substandard medicines is fairly straightforward. You know, these are medicines that are outside of the recognized specification. Spurious medicine is terminology used in South Asia and typically India to describe falsely labelled or products that are intended to deceive a patient or a healthcare professional. Falsely labelled includes genuine products which have been repackaged with false labelling, perhaps to extend expiry dates of medicines. Falsified is new European terminology. The reason that counterfeit doesn't get used so much now is because it's very much linked to intellectual property rights, and internationally the debate that's taking place is trying to separate protection of intellectual property for companies to separate that issue away from the public health issue, because this is a public health issue. And hence the legal terminology that's used for counterfeit in intellectual property legislation is seen as counterproductive. We want to concentrate on the health aspects. So falsified medicines is a new European terminology, but many countries still use the term counterfeit. But we haven't got a universally agreed definition of this. So I'm going to show you some examples. Think about these categories, and maybe I'll ask you what you think, which one they fall into. So the first case is one from Kenya. So this is an HIV medicine that's been reported by Médecins Sans Frontières. A patient went to the doctor and said, my tablets, you can't see very well here, there's mould growing on the tablet. And there was a suspicion that they were counterfeit. They were reported by Médecins Sans Frontières to the WHO as potentially counterfeit medicine. It turned out that, in fact, it was genuine medicine. It had mould growing on it because the patient had taken the medicine, the tablets, out of the packaging, put them into a tobacco tin. They'd got damp, they grew mould on them. after a forensic analysis, the medicine is okay, but the packaging wasn't. The packaging had been falsified, and the expiry dates had been extended, and that had been going on for 2 years, and these drugs were expired medicines. So that one was falsely labelled. So when we're talking about SSFFC, this is one of the Fs, falsely labelled. But this is a case in the USA. I think there was someone from the US at dinner last night. No. Okay. Oh well, there's one there. Yeah. Okay. So it's an oncology product. You know, heavily regulated market. But nevertheless, this product penetrated the supply chain and has done on a number of occasions. Reaching patients through clinics and hospitals, so we're not buying it off of the internet or a website that's suspicious or risky. This is from doctors. And the supply chain for this medicine stretched across 3 continents. So lots of different countries involved. This product was passing through lots of different countries and ports before it arrived at its destination. It's expensive and it looks very good. There's nothing in it. There's no active ingredient in this. This is mainly for the treatment of colon cancer, I think. But then in Vietnam, you know, we see 135 serious ADRs and 4 fatalities. Is anyone from Vietnam here? Not represented? No. Okay. So this is, you know, traditional medicine that's common in Vietnam, but we've seen some serious adverse reactions taking place. This is supplied by street vendors and street sellers. It was important that the reports came through to us and that you can then start to assess whether this medicine represents a risk to any other countries in that region. So that if there is a need to get some sort of public awareness out about the availability of orange medicine, and that's all it's known as, sometimes in these loosely pressed tablets and sometimes in a little plastic bag, but frequently used, there's a need to get some message out. So outside of the regulated supply chain, but because of the high levels of lead contamination, these were causing serious adverse reactions. This is a UK case when I was at the MHRA in the UK. Here, you know, we like to think very arrogantly in the UK that we were regulating our supply chain well, but it didn't turn out to be the case. Over 2 million of these doses got into our hospitals and clinics and care homes. I don't know if you're familiar with the products. Plavix is a very commonly used product. You know, you're all nodding. You know what this is for. Zyprexa, an antipsychotic medicine, and Casodex, one for prostate cancer. Relatively expensive, coming in large volumes. You see how they were getting smuggled? You get the blisters in cardboard drums being smuggled separately to the boxes, which are flat packed. So if customs get lucky and they stop this, the likelihood is they won't stop that, or vice versa. So, and the patient information leaflets will be smuggled separately again. So the counterfeiters are trying to minimise their risk of what they're going to lose. When this arrives in the destination country, it then gets reassembled and it ends up looking good enough to convince doctors and pharmacists to dispense the product. There were 13 countries involved in this. Here you see, this is the cancer medicine, but it's in boxes saying food colouring. So clearly, when you see something being smuggled, medicines being smuggled like that, there's clearly something wrong with it. This was subpotent, so there was some active ingredient in it. There were no adverse reactions attributed to this, but it was failing to treat the diseases from which the patients were suffering. Just think about your pharmacovigilance roles and lack of effectiveness that Shanti was speaking about as we go on this morning. Okay, and this one, you know, this was 2009. So this is a leukemia drug being smuggled in what should say PlayStation. We're all familiar with the old PlayStation, video games. Here you see a leukemia drug smuggled in Polystation 2. They'd not even spelt PlayStation properly on the box. But nevertheless, $2,000 per pack. This costs cents to produce. But this one did have the active ingredient in it. But once it was sent away for chemical analysis, it didn't dissolve. And so this was failing to treat the disease for which it was intended. And this was a sophisticated movement of this drug across many continents before it was intercepted in Malta by sharp-eyed customs officers. Okay, and then this one. So is Pakistan represented here? Anybody know? We haven't got Pakistan. Okay. There were 1,000 serious adverse reactions here and 200 deaths as a result of this particular medicine that was being supplied through a cardiac hospital, but the medicine was contaminated with pyrimethamine, an anti-malarial drug. So I was fortunate enough to go to Pakistan in connection with this case because it was suspected at the beginning to have been an outbreak of dengue fever. But then as the case progressed, you could see that definitely wasn't correct. 5 medicines, all being supplied from one hospital, were a common denominator with 46,000 patients. And there was massive recalls of these drugs carried out, but eventually it narrowed down to one medicine, and the analysis determined that was seriously contaminated to such an extent that that 200 people died. So there we've got an accidental manufacture. This was reported as a counterfeit medicine originally, but once you investigated it, it wasn't a counterfeit medicine, it was a manufacturing error. But that error had been compounded by attempts to cover it up, to cover up the fact that this had happened, and that allowed this to go on longer than it should have gone on. But here, a substandard medicine. There may be some sort of criminal negligence. It's up to the country involved and the legislation in that country to determine whether anything has reached a criminal standard. But from a health perspective, a really very, very serious incident, which came to light only because there was a cluster of adverse reactions in a very concentrated geographic area. And if there hadn't have been that concentration, and this one batch of contaminated product had been spread across all of Pakistan or had been exported around the world, then it's doubtful it would have been picked up at all. Okay, and the last one. Is anyone familiar with Coartem as anti-malarial? There's a few nods. This is a recent case. We've just issued a WHO drug alert for this. Millions of doses of this have been found in West and Central Africa. Lots have been seized by customs in the area. This is a WHO pre-qualified medicine, so there's high confidence in this medicine. It's part of anti-malaria access programs. It carries a green leaf motif, which is sought after and respected as a sign that the medicine is safe. But there's no active ingredient in this at all. So this treatment doesn't work. It looks, if you've got 2 packs to compare, the cardboard on this pack is slightly darker than the real one. But if you haven't got 2 to compare, you've got no chance. In fact, most of the medicines here have been designed, the effort goes into the packaging to convince a healthcare professional and a patient that it's genuine. And visual examination alone is unlikely to determine. The days of spelling mistakes on packaging are becoming less and less. and the quality of the packaging is looking fairly good. So you then need laboratory to assist to actually determine whether there's something wrong. So this is clearly what would have been called a falsified or a counterfeit or a spurious medicine, depending on which part of the world you come from, but with really serious consequences and very widespread. But have we attributed any adverse reactions to this? No. We don't know. But this is a treatment that's given for malaria. It's highly likely that there's been loss of life as a result of this, but it's difficult for us to evidence that. So again, just think about we'll get into the role of pharmacovigilance in all this shortly, but this is what I want you to think about. With the Coartem case and with the current case we've got running, again in West Africa, one of the first things we do is contact Shanti to contact UMC. What have we seen? What reports have we got from around the world about this medicine? Is there any signal? Is there anything at all in the databases that we've got that could indicate there's a wider problem? So if this issue crops up, which this one did originally in Cameroon, we want to know, is anything being seen in any other countries? Are healthcare professionals reporting this from any other countries? Because it will help us to understand how wide the threat is, how wide the drug alerts have to go out, how quickly we need to respond. And speed of response is an issue. Because the case in Pakistan with 200 that died escalated very, very quickly. And you have to be able to react to that quickly. We can't do this in slow time. So utilising the pharmacovigilance databases has proved quick and effective, and I'm sure there is much, much more we can do with the pharmacovigilance networks to improve the visibility of lack of effectiveness in some of the medicines that we see. Okay, so they're the examples out the way. So what's the true picture? There's lots of hype about this subject. It's an emotive subject. The press and the media get excited about it, and they quite often can misrepresent the situation, because there isn't any reliable global estimate of the scale of the issue, and policymakers require that detail, that evidence. As you heard from Shanti earlier, policymakers require evidence. They need to know, not from anecdote, not from stories about cases, the odd case here and the odd case there. They need good quality, systematic, validated data that can inform them of the threat, which will then lead to devoting the necessary resources to be able to monitor this and put in strategies to combat it. So you often see 75 billion black market in this. I'm not sure where the evidence comes from that supports that data, but that's a figure that's quite often mentioned. 100,000 deaths every year, not sure where that comes from. Establishing the harm is really quite. Are we still switched on? Yeah. Okay. Establishing the harm is really difficult. And you still hearing me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's have a look. Okay, customs sees millions of medicines at the border. You quite often see this, but what you don't see is, well, what were they? What were the medicines that were seized? And when customs make a big seizure, it's unlikely to have been the first time that medicines have used that route to get into a particular country. It's usually a pattern, and when you investigate this, you can see that it's happened repeatedly. But quite often, a seizure will be made, lots of medicines, newspaper article, that's it. Well, what about, is this on the market? Has it reached the population? And quite often that evidence is not there. 400 counterfeit medicine factories shut down. That was evidence from, this was media reporting from one country, but again, no detail about whether this is accurate or not. This was a UK one. Hospitals flooded with counterfeit. This was this Plavix and Zyprexa job. This undermines confidence. Patients lose confidence. if there's overhyped activity around this. It needs to be accurate data, and that's what the project is about. It's about obtaining accurate data so that we can better inform people. In Pakistan, with the case where 200 people died, the population in Lahore lost complete confidence in locally produced medicine. They stopped taking any locally produced medicine because of that. You ended up with a worse health situation than the one you were originally dealing with because of out of control, overhyped media reporting. The media can be extremely useful in getting the message out when you want to publish a drug alert, but it can also be extremely destructive if inaccurate information starts to spread, and this causes the panic amongst the public. And 10 tons of counterfeit medicine seized. An African case, this one, but again, no detail from the customs organisations about what they were. So we've initiated a surveillance and monitoring project, and we want to try and establish more accurately what the scale of the issue is, the geographic extent of the problem, the medicines that are most affected, the harm caused. So not just these incidents where you've got some sort of serious toxic effect from the medicine which has clearly led to a serious adverse reaction, but also this lack of efficacy issue, and I'll come back to that shortly. And the value of the market and the supply chain vulnerabilities. Because each of those cases I showed you, and every case we deal with, and there are now over 100 in the last couple of months since this study has started, there's over 100 products in the system. Each case has got a story. And if you examine and analyse and get under the skin of that incident, you will then identify where the vulnerabilities are. And when you start to compare incidents, you can see the common denominators where policy change can make a difference, where you can tighten the systems. And already in the preliminary stages of this, you can see where there are common denominators, whether it's a case reported from Russia or whether it's a case reported from Cambodia. You can see some common denominators in where systems are weak and allow this product to get into to reach the public and patients. This project is not just about changing policy and convincing our politicians and parliaments and senior management of the issue, but it also provides operational assistance when countries report issues. So if we have one country, as happened recently, report a blood product which is a counterfeit, the system tells us that another country in another part of the world has reported the same product, same batch number. The first country didn't have any laboratories that could conduct the analysis, but the country that had previously reported it had already done all of their analysis. So putting those two countries together assisted them in handling the incident. There was a clear operational benefit from being able to put countries together where you see these links occur. So there's operational cooperation. It informs policymakers of the accurate threat. It enables evidence-based decision making. So not anecdote. You know, with this area of work, there's a lot of anecdote. In fact, there's a real need for evidence-based. And Shanti was talking to you about evidence-based decision making earlier, and it's the same with this topic. And there we say it. But they're difficult to detect because visually these things look okay. If you're a counterfeiter, you don't want to kill anybody, because when you do that, the likelihood is the regulators and the police and people start to take notice. They want to make a lot of money because this is profit that drives this business, and they want to do it in a way that isn't going to create a storm of interest from regulators and healthcare professionals and the media and everybody else. You do get incidents where there are life-threatening issues, and you've seen some examples of that. but most of them are subpotent. They're subpotent counterfeits, which won't lead to an obvious serious adverse reaction, but will fail to treat. There will be a lack of efficacy. So we've asked UMC to, and you're going to hear about this in more detail, I think, later on, to look at their systems and develop algorithms where they can mine the data that's been reported from around the world for lack of efficacy, so that we can start to spot where there may be unusual reporting coming in from countries, and that will drive some investigative work or some market surveillance just to check if those medicines are okay or not. There's fragmented reporting. You've seen that chart earlier from Shanti, where most reports coming in on pharmacovigilance from North America and Europe. You know, there's absolute need to ensure that pharmacovigilance reporting is extended. It's really important tool, and that whenever I or anybody that works with me is talking about this issue, we really push and push and push about pharmacovigilance. And there's a close linkage here. And you represent eyes and ears that can help in ensuring that this type of thing gets reported. And we'll talk about a few workshops that are coming up where we're going to bring pharmacovigilance together with people within regulatory agencies that deal with these types of issues. Engaging the right stakeholders is important. We have a nurse here. Some of the best reports come from nurses in the system. You know, one nurse in a hospital in Crimea noticed that a medicine wasn't working properly in her hospital. She was convinced that that was the case. She took the trouble to report it to the authorities. That medicine had stretched right across the Ukraine. It was down to the vigilance of that nurse. And recently, a doctor has just reported an incident where an 8-year-old child was received some medicine in a hospital. 5 minutes, an injection. 5 minutes later, cardiac arrest, unable to resuscitate. You know, that doctor immediately took the trouble to find out a way, which wasn't easy. It should be a lot easier. How can I report this? And of course, as soon as she reported it, the wheels got in motion. And so engaging the right stakeholders is important. And that does include patients. So the Plavix and Zyprexa case that I mentioned to you, one patient who'd been taking Zyprexa, antipsychotic, was in the habit of polishing his tablet before he'd take it. This was part of his psychotic behaviour. He'd polish. And when he polished it, the numbers came off. And that never usually happened. But he knew, he'd been on Zyprexa for some time. He knew that there was something wrong with this, and he reported it. Now, as a result of that, 2.1 million doses were uncovered. The manufacturers were arrested and sent to prison for 6 years. The distributors went to prison for 8 years, all because one patient, you know, polished his tablet and recognised there was something wrong. You know, patients that are on repeat prescription, they know their medicine, and they're a good source of reports. So the right stakeholders might be regulatory agencies, pharmacovigilance, laboratories, healthcare professionals, police, customs, industry, but patients as well, you know. But when we respond, we have to respond proportionately because of the panic that can be caused. You have to wait for validation. You have to wait for a laboratory analysis, but it has to be quick, you know, because bad incidents can escalate so quickly that you need to be able to take action quickly. When I asked Shanti to get me some details on Coartem from UMC, it was about sort of 3 hours before information was coming back to us. You know, that's the speed with which you have to operate. Okay, so there's just a list of the types of things that we want to know about. The imitation of genuine medicines, attempting to conceal the place of manufacture, medicines that are misdeclared to customs as PlayStations instead of leukemia drugs, stolen medicines, falsified documents. The number of times I see false certificates of analysis accompanying medicines, complete fraudulent document suggesting that the medicine is fine when it isn't. So misleads, the packaging might mislead concerning the licensing status. Imitation of safety and security features on the medicines are all indications that there's something wrong, and they're all things that we want to know about. So, the project that we've undertaken to try and encourage more systematic and structured reporting of the incidents is a rapid alert form. And I'm going to show it in a little bit more detail in a minute. But you see a 2-page electronic form. And it's split up into these sections. If you're going to fill all the form out, there's 72 fields. But some of them are red, and that means they're mandatory fields. There's 30 of them, and 9 of those can be pre-filled. It's your name and address and fax number and phone number. So you can pre-fill that and save this form on your computer. And when you need it, retrieve the form and at the very least just fill in the red sections and send it to rapidalert@who.int, and that then comes into our system. The system will automatically strip the data off of here and populate a database at the WHO. And you will get an automated message saying that you'll be contacted within 72 hours at the latest by somebody from the WHO, who will just ask you probably 4 or 5 questions. And as a result of your answers to those 4 or 5 questions, you may get asked some more. And the analyst at the WHO, or me, will then start to populate more details within the database. Because I was talking to you about you need to understand the incident in some detail before you can spot where the vulnerabilities in the supply chain were. So it's a matter of, so what we've got are focal points in countries, and I'll talk to you about a pilot study in a moment which we've conducted with 10 countries. They were each trained, given the form, and asked to report their incidents, which they did. So that's still too small for you guys at the back, is it? Yeah, it's too small. Let's try again. Is that any better? You can, right. So just looking at a couple of the areas. This one is suspect product details and impact on public health. You'll see the red questions must be completed. Where you've got an orange box, there's a drop-down menu. So if it's a type of product, innovator, generic, vaccine, blood, diagnostic, herbal, traditional, other, you'll just tick whichever one it is. If it's a dosage form or container type, you'll find a list and you can scroll up and down until you find the one it is, and you just press and click to complete and send. If we encourage countries to send photographs, if they've got them, this just gets sent as an attachment to an email. So from your Yahoo address or whatever you've got, you attach the form. If you've got photographs, you attach the photographs. If you've got any other documents, some countries send us certificates of analysis, import and export documents, all sorts of things get attached to it. But this all gets taken automatically into the system. So there's no passwords, there's no portals, there's none of that. The different language versions of this form are now being tested because there's language recognition built into this document, and the French version is just being rolled out, and we'll look to cover Arabic and Mandarin and Spanish, please. No, you can't save the document. The reason the red fields are red is because when that report arrives, we need the minimum of data to conduct some sort of risk assessment. There's a risk assessment process that takes place at the WHO as to who else needs to know about this. What we're concerned with is whether we've got a significant threat and whether other countries or regions are affected. That doesn't mean that we're going to as soon as we receive something, it's going to go worldwide, because it definitely won't without talking to the originator of the report and the country that's originated that report. But that's the sort of thing we're thinking about as point one, and we also recognise that quite often you need careful validation, because I stress the point, it must be proportionate action that we take, and disproportionate action will lead to a worse issue than the one you're dealing with. So we're careful before we do go public with anything, but there may be a need to do that if there's a significant risk to public health. And if we've got adverse reactions, you press a yes or no to this, and if you press yes, a couple of these go red, and we want to know the number of patients that might be at risk, what the symptoms were, what we're seeing from adverse reactions. Some countries send us toxicology reports, some countries send a great deal of detail, other countries send us very little detail because they haven't got it. But nevertheless, that information's coming in, we can research, we can start to analyse and then classify the case so that we're comparing like cases with like. If India were to report an incident and the incident had already been reported by Nigeria, the system would tell us straight away that this is a duplicate report, that we've seen this medicine before, we've seen this batch number before. So you can put countries in touch with one another if that's necessary very quickly. This is just a quick screenshot of the database that sits behind. There's lots and lots of fields in this database. This is not for you as originators or the focal points in a country to worry about. This is for us to worry about at the WHO. So the information from the report form will automatically populate this database, and then we will start to look at a bit more detail. So the incident details, our risk assessment that we'll carry out, the reporting and suspect details, how the product was discovered, is there any investigation, and if there is, who is it that's carrying it out? If there's internet distribution, what was the website? What was the website details and where was it hosted? Just very quick details that we can carry out at the WHO and checks that we can do. Some countries will tell you where the money went. So in the UK, my role was to investigate the cases and prosecute them when we had them, and there's always two lines of inquiry with a counterfeit medicine case. One is, where did the medicine come from? And a second is, where did the money go? Some countries will tell you that. And it's interesting to see common denominators. If we see money passing through a company in the British Virgin Islands, Gibraltar, the Seychelles, a tax haven, countries that are tax havens are quite often where the companies are situated in which the money from these incidents goes through. If we see that on a number of occasions, then we'll make an approach to the government of that country to let them know that their system is facilitating this sort of thing. If it's but it's not just the payment routes, it's a distribution route. How was it transported? Which ports did it go through? Where did it come from? Where were the transit points? Did it come by air, sea, road? All of that sort of detail goes into the database. So when you see a company crop up more than once, it will tell us. We've seen this before, and it was on this case that was being dealt with in Lebanon or wherever it was. There's good operational assistance that can be achieved from this, and it's information that just gets, when you're looking at the health issues of this, you pick up lots of other information as well, and that information needs to be passed back to countries to assist them in dealing with the case. Right, establishing harm to public health. What other mechanisms exist that can help us to identify suspected incidents? Well, obviously pharmacovigilance is one that we think can assist. Some cases have clearly identifiable levels of harm, some don't, and it's more difficult to identify the harm. So the lack of efficacy algorithm that's been developed here, which you'll hear about from UMC, we think is a big step forward and has quite a bit of potential on the initial testing that's already been carried out. And what other methods can be used to measure the effect of SSFFC on public health? There are, I keep talking to you about policymakers, but when I went to see ministers in the UK, and I would say, look, we've had a serious issue, 2 million doses in our hospitals. They will, how big is this problem? Is it much bigger, or is this the tip of the iceberg, or is there more to this? Yeah, we want to know that. So of course we want to know the scale of the issue, but very quickly. And what's the harm caused? And some countries will say, well, how many hospital beds are occupied for how many nights by people that are suffering from the effects of falsified medicines? That can be the level of detail that's required. How many how many doctors' appointments are taken up in certain countries by members of the public who have obtained medicines from illegal websites? And how much is that costing the health systems? They're the sort of policy, political questions that will be asked to determine what sort of money and resources gets put into this issue. And to arrive at those decisions about money and resources, you need this accurate data to protect public health on the front line, but also to put in the strategies and policies behind the scenes to help prevent it in the future. There's another case in Pakistan, and I think this one got, because we had the first case a year and a half ago in Lahore, and we were able to deal with that one very quickly. Unfortunately, another incident occurred there a year later, and there was a series of deaths of members of the public that had been taking cough syrup, and that was quickly followed by the next city by another. So we had 20 deaths here, sudden deaths, 30 here within about 2 weeks of one another. 2 cough medicines made by different manufacturers. But this cough medicine was being abused, was being taken by drug abusers. So quite a lot of the medicines we see, one of the questions we ask is, what was the main intended use of the medicine, and are there any other uses for it as well? So with the cough medicine, it's quite often being used in conjunction with heroin. These were all heroin addicts, and they'd been abusing this medicine for 20 years with no unexpected adverse reactions. They had the usual reactions they would expect, but not unexpected ones. And of course, the drug addicts wouldn't speak to the police. In fact, they're the last people you're going to speak to. So you couldn't get any information from them. But there was an NGO that worked with the drug addicts in Lahore. We could develop a questionnaire for them and get them to speak to those addicts. And, well, what's wrong with this? And they said, well, actually, it should taste like cherry. And that particular weekend, it didn't taste like cherry. It was very bitter tasting. And a number of witnesses came forward that were giving that sort of information. So we carried out an investigation into the 2 manufacturers, and it turned out that they'd both recently changed their source of active pharmaceutical ingredient supply to another company. So the same company producing the API, sending it to 2 from outside of Pakistan, was sending it to manufacturers in Pakistan who would then produce the medicine. The API was contaminated. And it was that contamination that was leading to the deaths. And those batches, of which there were lots, had been distributed in a very sort of concentrated area around Lahore. And so again, you had a very clear signal, very quickly reported. Because this was the second incident in a year, the authorities in Pakistan dealt with this one much more effectively and professionally than they did the first one. And they took immediate action, recalled the medicines, carried out the investigation, quarantined lots of product, found lots of API at the airport that was coming in. Again, when that was tested, that was tainted as well. So there was, this sort of reporting and pharmacovigilance systems were important. On the first case that was in Pakistan, where I mentioned dengue fever, that they had surveillance committees set up to monitor for dengue, and those surveillance committees were very quick to pick up unexpected deaths which at first they thought might be something to do with dengue, but subsequently it wasn't. But that was they had good surveillance systems in place in the cities, so it picked it up really quickly. And again on that one. So we want to develop the link. But when I asked Shanti for pharmacovigilance data from UMC, this isn't my specialism. I need help in interpreting that data. So how much weight can I place on this? Is this giving us some information that tells us that there's a wider problem that's extending across a region or a sub-region or many regions in the world? So we can see closer and closer ties with the pharmacovigilance network. You're a potential source of reporting for us, and as I said earlier, you're the eyes and ears. And we need to get that pie chart that Shanti was talking about looking different. You know, we need to get more reporting, not just North America, not just Europe, you know, but we need to see more reporting from many of the countries that are represented here. The pilot study involved these countries: Belarus, Croatia, Cambodia, Georgia, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Mongolia, Philippines, Russia, Ukraine, Vietnam. And there were 2 sets of observers, Chinese Food and Drugs Agency and the US FDA, who participated in the training workshop. And then these countries reported over a 3-month period. What do you get back? You know, countries get back analysis and reporting, geographic, country, regional, global level. You can get thematic reporting and analysis on therapeutic categories, trend reporting on supply rates, routes, and laboratory analysis, and what have you. In the database that you don't have to worry about, our database that we have to worry about, there's 250 fields which are all searchable and measurable in any combination. So you can get some very, very detailed work done here. Many people talk about TB and malaria and HIV, and that these drugs are susceptible to falsification and counterfeiting, but which ones? Which ones are more susceptible than others? If you say to a customs officer, keep your eye open for any suspicious medicines, that's not good enough. You have to be more specific. You have to give them an idea of which ones are the most at risk, which ones to be able to keep their eye open for more. Back in the UK, we had a system where we came up with a watch list, and on the watch list there's 10 or 12 medicines, and that watch list is created following a stakeholder meeting with healthcare professionals and police and customs and regulators and industry. And that watch list would then be put on a little plastic card, and it would be given to customs officers at ports, and it would have the name of the medicine, and it would have a telephone number to call. And you'd say to customs officers, keep your eye open, you know, be alert for medicines that are being smuggled or you know, that you're suspicious of, but in particular, check these ones out if you see these. And that led to greater scrutiny on the products which we knew were more at risk, represented a greater risk to our supply chain. This system, and that list isn't made public, because just as I was talking earlier to the organisers here, when counterfeiters have been caught in various countries, and in the UK when I was there as well, the first thing you do is you take their laptop and you take their BlackBerry or their iPhone and you submit it to forensic examination. Now, of course, most countries will have difficulty in having access to those sort of facilities, but when you've got them, you learn a great deal about how this works. And on their laptops, when you recreate their browsing, what they've been looking at on the internet, WHO website, US FDA website, MHRA website, Chinese FDA websites, they'll be looking at all the websites, counterfeit, falsified medicine pages, because they want to know what products are we recalling, what action are we taking, what strategies are we carrying out. They'll check the internet to see if there's any presentations being put on the internet about falsified medicines, because all it does is teaches them how to improve the next batch not to make any more batches with the batch number that's just been recalled, because they won't be able to sell it. We have no option but to put a recall notice out with a batch number on, but we don't need to say, well, actually the ink should have been slightly darker green in the third letter along on the top, you know, or you don't want to put that level of detail in, because all that's happening is you're educating them. You know, you need to put enough information to warn the public and healthcare professionals, but not too much to inform the counterfeiter. Okay, last slide. This system we've tried out with the countries that I've mentioned, Western Pacific and European regions. And as a result of the pilot, we made about 50 changes to the reporting form and to the database. Just little improvements that we made. But now it's ready to go. And in July, there'll be a workshop carried out in Nigeria, of which 16 countries from Western Africa and Central Africa will be invited. One pharmacovigilance expert and one regulatory expert that deals with these types of incidents. 3-day workshop, and they'll deal with, and it's exercises. So you're not sat in a classroom like this, you're sat in a circle, and you've got a laptop, and you'll be given 5 exercises, 5 real incidents in which to discuss and deal with. And then at the end of each incident, you report it using the rapid alert form to test and try out the form. This was the model that we used in Manila, but we didn't have pharmacovigilance people at the workshop. This time we will have. At the end of July, there is another one in Dar es Salaam, where Eastern African and Southern African countries will be invited, and in September it will be in Tunisia for Middle Eastern and the Eastern Mediterranean region countries to be invited as well, to encourage this more systematic and structured reporting. So I really hope that, having looked around the room here, and I'll now recognise some of you, that I'm going to meet you again in these workshops where you'll actually be testing the system and trying out it on some real incidents that are taking place. Okay, so there's my name. The lady that works with me is Panette. She's a French lady, so obviously native French speaker. The Rapid Alert email, you can contact at any time, not just to report, but to, if you've got any questions about SSFFC medicines or any incident that you might be dealing with, or you've got any problem or concern that you don't want to officially report, but you want to discuss, please do so, because lots of countries already do. And there you see our own personal email addresses at the WHO. Don't hesitate to contact, because we'd like to hear from you. And as I say, many countries do, so don't be slow in coming forward. Sir.
Thank you. Getting back into what you said about regulations, there is a case that I have seen many times in Tenerife. I can speak through about the rest of the Spain, but it called my attention that when we used to make the prescription of Astefor, which is ibuprofen plus codeine, so they require the prescription, which is very normal. But when the people get called Eferalgan, which is paracetamol plus codeine, they can get it with no any prescription. So I don't know if it's something punctual in our islands or is because of the regulation, but it called my attention because finally is the codeine what as I understand what maybe can cause any risk for the health patient.
Okay. Even within European countries, as you'll probably know better than I, some products are on prescription, some are not. There's no consistency across the EU in relation to that. And people that are involved in counterfeiting and falsified medicines, they will spot all of these little intricacies, whether a prescription is needed, whether a prescription is not needed, what the demand is in a particular country, and they will shape their business, and they'll construct they'll manufacture and supply particular medicines to exploit little loopholes and angles that exist. An example is a medicine to deal with late stage Alzheimer's disease. Access to that was restricted in some countries to late stage. It wouldn't be prescribed in early stage. So people that were making falsified medicines recognized that a market had just been created in the population that was suffering from early stage Alzheimer's for this particular medicine, and they responded to that by making counterfeit versions. So you know, any of these little intricacies about whether a prescription is needed, whether it's not needed, when a will be exploited by people that really understand our markets. You know, these guys are quite